Hi, this is Barry Phillips with 10 Minute Torah, day 2 of the Torah portion Vayera. Yesterday we were talking about the blending of the spiritual and the physical realms in an area of a covenant meal. Now obviously Abraham would be benefiting from this, but there's someone else that needs to be brought into this, and I've just touched on this yesterday. And that is that Sarah also was allowed to participate in this open vision. Now, one would wonder why it was that maybe the wife needed to be brought in. Well, I think it's important. If she's going to be the one giving birth to Yitzhak, then it's important. Now, how do we know that she is being elevated here and being brought in? Well, if we look back in chapter number 17, the word says in verse 19, and Elohim said, "No, Sarah, your wife, is truly bearing you a son, and you shall call his name Yitzhak. And I shall establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him." And then in verse 21, "But my covenant I establish with Yitzhak, whom Sarah is to bear to you at this appointed time next year." Abraham already knew that he was going to have a son, that Sarah would be the mother of this son, and that the birth would take place in about a year. He already knew that. Could it be that he did not share this information with Sarah? I don't think he did. And don't ask me why he would not have done that. I don't know. I don't know. But when Yah begins to speak, he says in chapter 18, verse 10, "I shall certainly return to you according to the time of life, and see, Sarah your wife is to have a son." She was listening at the tent door, and when she heard this, she laughed. This was news to her. Why didn't Abraham tell her? I don't know. But she heard it and she laughed. She asked within herself, after I have grown old, she's 90 years old, "Shall I have pleasure, my master being old too?" And she said, Yah asked, why did she laugh? "Shall I truly have a child since I'm old?" Just as an aside, the question that Yah asked here is a question that we need to answer. He asked, is any matter too hard for Yahweh? No. Absolutely, definitively no. Anything you can ask, think, or imagine, he can do. If you believe him for it, if you're willing to be a participant in how it's done, there's nothing that is too hard for Yah. I'll leave that. That's all that needs to be said on that. So Sarah is being brought into this covenant revelation. She's been also included in this open vision, and it is life-changing for her. Now, briefly, I want to go with you over to the book of Romans, chapter number 4. And this chapter, beginning in verse 16 and following, talks about how that Abraham is the father of us all. As he has been said, "I have made you a father of many nations." And as describing him, it says, "Who against all expectation did believe in expectation, so that he should become father of many nations, according to what was said, so shall your seed be. And not having grown weak in belief, he did not consider his own body already dead, being about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. He did not hesitate about the promise of Elohim through unbelief, but was strengthened in belief, giving esteem to Elohim, and was being completely persuaded that what Elohim had promised, Elohim, was able to do." and it was reckoned to him for righteousness. Sarah was 90 years old. She had gone through menopause. She was no longer in the process of capably bearing children. He was 100 years old. Now, he lived to be, 180? And he fathered more children after this. But he was an old man. She was an old woman. And she was saying, shall I have pleasure? Reading between the lines, it would seem to me that they had given up on the childbearing, child-creating, procreation process, because it was of no use, at least as far as producing a son. Now just bear with me here. She was an old woman. She considered herself an old woman. Maybe the gray hairs were, in that day, they lived a lot longer. She lived to be 127, but, she's getting older. She sees herself as such. In the next chapter of our Torah portion, in chapter number 20, Abimelech, a king, sees her and wants to marry her. Her beauty is radiant. She is still a desirable woman. There is that sparkle of life about her. There is that desirability about her. What happened from chapter 18 into, is it chapter 20? Yeah, chapter number 20. So something happened here. Some period of time had taken place. Abraham did not consider his own body. He looked beyond the physical limitations and the impossibilities of the fleshly physical realm and was looking solely at the power of the promise. And the power of his belief in the promise rejuvenated his body and hers so that she began cycling again and becoming capable of bearing a child, which she did. Now, could it be then that belief in the promises of Yah, his covenant promises, is the fountain of youth? If you want to look younger, be younger, have more life, believe in the power of the promises contained in his covenant. Now, there's more to this, and I need to try to squeeze this in if at all possible. Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, I think I say that correctly, makes an interesting point here that motherhood is biological. There is just this inner desire to nurture, to procreate, to want to love and care for an infant child. While fatherhood is not biological, it is cultural. And it requires a moral sense of responsibility and duty and obligation and a desire to bring up your child effectively. And while Sarah would be overjoyed at being able to nurse her child and see her young son grow up, Abraham was seeing, not biologically, but morally, spiritually, his need. And Yah recognizes this in him, and he says in verse 19, "For I have known him," speaking of Abraham, "so that he commands his children and his household after him to guard the way of Yahweh, to do tzedakah mishpat, righteousness and right ruling." The word tzedakah is not only righteousness, it is the idea of justice. He's going to rule his house well. And he's going to raise up the son in whose name the covenant will be called, to walk righteously and to walk with right ruling, with right understanding, not only for himself and his home, but for those that are around him. This is in great contrast to the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah and others. We're going to touch on those tomorrow as we struggle to get out of chapter number 18. Until then, shalom.